What did Dennis Rader, David Berkowitz, Keith Jesperson, and the infamous Zodiac have in common? Other than being depraved serial killers, that is. These and many other killers were attention seekers, writing letters to police departments and newspapers, bragging about or giving up information that wasn't public knowledge, in a sick and egotistical game of cat and mouse with those trying to catch them. Times and technology have changed since these killers were on their murderous rampages. This doesn't mean that today's killers don't always stay in the shadows. A new, albeit only accused at this time, killer may have used social media as an ego boost after committing one of the most news-covered multiple murders in recent times. Welcome to Bad Things, and our video on the Bryan Kohberger Papa Rodgers theory that has online sleuths arguing and scratching their heads for some clarity. Bryan Kohberger is accused of viciously stabbing and killing 4 University of Idaho students in an off-campus apartment in Moscow, Idaho. Kaylee Gonsalves, 21, Ethan Chapin, 20, Madison Mogan, 21, and Zanika Nodal, 20, were brutally killed in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022. On December 30th, suspect Bryan Christopher Kohberger was arrested in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, on 4 charges of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The evidence against Kohberger seems at this point to be pretty damning, with detectives and prosecutors seemingly keeping some evidence close to their chests before the trial starts. So how then did a user profile on Facebook accurately predict what law enforcement would find at the crime scene and the timeline of events leading up to the murders? A gag order by the courts has prevented authorities and even the victims' families from elaborating or clarifying the details of the case, creating an information vacuum that online sleuths are trying to fill with speculation and wild theories. One of these theories is that before being arrested for the quadruple murders, Kohberger masqueraded as Papa Rodgers on a Facebook group discussing the murders. Just over 2 weeks after the murders, on November 30th, the first Papa Rodgers post appeared on a Facebook discussion group called University of Idaho Murders Case Discussion. The post read, "Of the evidence released, the murder weapon has been consistent as a large fixed-blade knife. This leads me to believe they found the sheath." This post proved to be prophetic as the knife sheath discovery was only made public on January 5th when the probable cause affidavit was released. On the same day, Papa Rodgers made another eerie comment, this time stating exactly where the killer or killers entered the house. "I believe the killer or killers came from the high side of the house. They were covered in blood after the attack. This high side of the house was where Dylan Mortensen, a surviving roommate of the victims, saw the suspect and described him as a male stranger, around 5 feet 10 inches, and not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows, leaving through the back sliding door." When dissecting this post, online sleuths made another connection after Kohberger was arrested. After being booked into Monroe County Jail, Kohberger allegedly asked police whether anyone else had been arrested in connection with the murders. Online sleuths believe that the opening sentence in the post, "I believe the killer, killers," and Kohberger's comment after being arrested is far from a coincidence. On December 1st, Papa Rodgers would post again, saying, "This is the high side of the house. They found evidence here. It is likely blood droppings from the killer. Either they fled through this area, or they were parked there." This being the most strategic entrance point to the house, it shows planning. When the probable cause affidavit was released, it stated that the white Elantra that Kohberger apparently used to get to and from the crime scene had been seen multiple times on Queen Road, which is just behind the high side of the house. If Kohberger is indeed Papa Rodgers, this post could be interpreted as a boast about how much planning the murders took. On December 2nd, another post leaning towards strategy and planning was posted, saying, "Did the killer drive or walk from the scene? Thoughts?" On December 5th, Papa Rodgers would step up his posting by adding a floor plan of the house and where he thought Zana's body was found. "Based on the evidence, this is where I believe Zana was found." How Papa Rodgers had access to the floor plan of the house and where Zana's room was is still to be determined. Kohberger's white Elantra is seen as critical evidence by prosecutors in the case against him. On December 7th, police revealed they were checking records for around 22,000 fifth-generation Hyundai Elantras manufactured between 2011 and 2013. A camera in the vicinity of the victim's home recorded footage of a white or light-colored Elantra around the time of the killings, which detectives discovered had made numerous runs along the same route near the property. Another security camera showed an Elantra driving by the victim's residence 3 times, starting at about 3:29 a.m. At 4:04 a.m., the Elantra drove past for the 4th time. At 4:20 a.m., the car was seen driving away from the victim's location. The next day, on December 8th, Papa Rodgers posted, "I feel like the white car isn't relevant." This post has been interpreted by online sleuths as a moment, if Kohberger is actually Papa Rodgers, when he realizes that maybe law enforcement is on his heels and is trying to minimize an essential piece of evidence. December 8th proved to be a prolific posting day for Papa Rodgers. His posts, after minimizing the white Elantra, came in a flurry, as if to steer other members of the group away from the car evidence. He would go on to ask questions like, why the killer chose a knife as the weapon of choice? Why did the killer choose that house over all the others in the area? Why do we think the dog was spared? In your opinion, did the killer shower at the crime scene afterward? Papa Rodgers would continue to ask random questions on Facebook to the point where one user felt that Papa Rodgers was using the discussion group as a study. They commented by saying, "I was getting chills listening to and reading the affidavit about the sheath being found with DNA because when he was in groups commenting, he kept referring to the sheath, which is just a weird word to use over and over, and be so focused on without having any knowledge of the details that we now have. That literally made me cringe that he was so obvious in speculating about these murders, posing as a sleuth, and it's like he was still studying the reactions of not only the victims during the crime, but the public as well. Like we were all a part of his study. I don't know, but I have never felt so strange about comments made in any true crime groups as I do those comments." His study in the comment refers to Kohberger pursuing his master's degree in criminology and criminal justice. Sticking with the study angle, one YouTuber went as far as to put forward the theory that Papa Rodgers is an anagram for grad paper op, due to all the questions asked in the discussion group. Another Facebook group member challenged Papa Rodgers in a comment aimed at him, saying that he communicated like a serial killer. Online sleuths aren't the only ones who think Papa Rodgers is Bryan Kohberger. Jennifer Coffindaffer, a former FBI investigator, has sided with those who believed that the account belonged to Kohberger. Coffindaffer also described the uncanny reference to accounts that only the killer could have known. Papa Rodgers' run on Facebook would come to an end, though. An admin of the group later clarified that despite Rodgers' apparent authority in the group, he was never an admin or moderator. Christine Cameron wrote, "He was on here and argued incessantly with people and said some really creepy stuff and posted similar questions to Bryan's crime questions. We removed Papa Rodgers at 7:10 the evening before Bryan's arrest. He created a group page and had 6 people in it. No one has heard from Papa Rodgers since the arrest." While some online sleuths believed that the Facebook account belonged to Kohberger, many now think that YouTuber JLR Investigates is behind it. The man behind JLR Investigates is Jonathan Lee Riches. When it comes to Riches being Papa Rodgers, the online sleuths who believe he is may not be far off the mark. Riches' history seems like a ridiculous movie script and unbelievable at times. Since January 8, 2006, he has filed more than 2,600 cases in federal district courts around the United States, some of which have gained significant media attention. Among the more well-known defendants in his lawsuits are New England's Patriots coach Bill Belichick, former President George W. Bush, former Attorney General Janet Reno, Martha Stewart, Steve Jobs, Somali pirates, and Britney Spears. Some of Rich's defendants are not even humans who can be sued. These include Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Party and the 13 Tribes of Israel. One case in which George W. Bush is the first named defendant also names 790 additional defendants across 57 pages. They include Plato, Nostradamus, Che Guevara, Jimmy Hoffa, various Buddhist monks, all Holocaust survivors, the Lincoln Memorial, the Eiffel Tower, the USS Cole, the book Mein Kampf, the Garden of Eden, the Roman Empire, the Appalachian Trail, Plymouth Rock, the Holy Grail, Nordic gods, the dwarf planet Pluto, and the entire 3 Mile Island accident. On December 16th, 2 days after the Sandy Hook school shooting, Riches went to Connecticut to see perpetrator Adam Lanza's family. Riches, who documented a portion of the journey and posted portions to his YouTube channel, was turned away from the Lanza family's neighborhood by a police barrier. Online sleuths theorized that Riches was trying to use the Papa Rodgers pseudonym to gather theories and content for his YouTube channel, and the only way he could do this was to insert himself into the case. It's safe to say that Jonathan Lee Riches most likely isn't Papa Rodgers, but certainly an attention-seeking true crime grifter who jumped on the bandwagon of intense coverage of this case. If Papa Rodger was Bryan Kohberger, why would he risk being caught posting online? Sunshine's Louise on Reddit asked this same question, but in relation to serial killers. So I was just thinking about how serial killers and the like have a very inflated ego and often hate it when the cleverness of their crimes goes unrecognized. Often that is why they contact the police and newspapers, etc. But do you think that some of these criminals do this via social media, blog posts, Reddit, etc., to influence how their crimes are perceived? Not by stating that they are in fact the criminal, but by suggesting theories of how the crime was committed, or linking cases that have not yet been officially linked. On a related note, do detectives take this into consideration? Like they canvass victims' grave sites and murder sites, do they also keep an eye on social media, noting that these types of killers feel the need for involvement in investigations, often getting a thrill from it, and a need for recognition of their ingenuity? Any thoughts on this, or evidence of the above happening? If Kohberger was indeed Papa Rodger, Sunshine's Louise's statements to influence how their crimes are perceived, by suggesting theories of how the crime was committed, and a need for recognition of their ingenuity, fits the Papa Rodger posts to the letter. Investigative criminologist and author Christopher Berry D. has called Kohberger an extreme narcissist with an overinflated ego, bordering on self-interest at the expense of others, with his arrogance bringing him into conflict with his peers, who collectively dismissed him from his post as a teaching assistant. Kohberger had been a teaching assistant at WSU as part of his PhD studies when he was let go. Only 2 weeks before the killings, staff members scheduled a meeting with Kohberger to discuss their growing fears about his behavior and actions. Kohberger was dismissed from his teaching assistant position on December 19th. This was attributable to his unsatisfactory performance as a teaching assistant, including his failure to meet the norms of professional behavior in his interactions with the faculty. This behavior as a teaching assistant mirrors his Papa Rodger interactions with other Facebook group members. So what do we at Bad Things think about the Papa Rodger theory? First of all, there is the profile picture linked to the Papa Rodger account, which has an uncanny resemblance to Kohberger. The picture, created by Yi Shu in 2012, is a depiction of an unknown World War II Russian soldier. Some Redditors feel that Kohberger used this specific picture as a reference to Moscow, the town in Idaho where the murders took place. The timing of Papa Rodger's disappearance from social media also coincides with Kohberger's arrest. Most telling of all is his predictions in the case we have mentioned earlier, and questions asked to get a feel of how the true crime community viewed the crime, or to sway their opinion of the evidence being collected. Bryan Kohberger might just have been Papa Rodgers. A digital footprint has been the downfall of many criminals. Prosecutors in Kohberger's case have over 50 terabytes of digital evidence that they will use in the case, and with the gag order still in effect, we don't know if the Papa Rodger posts have been investigated. By November 17th, the internet might finally figure out who Papa Rodger is. But more importantly, did Bryan Kohberger kill the Idaho 4?